Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that helps you discover deeper levels of truth, meaning, and wholeness. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is a writer, an inner work practitioner, and a mythodynamics researcher. He spent the first 24 years of his life dealing with an incessant mental chatter, which he tried to address with various meditations. Most of them had little benefit, and it was only when he came across somatic meditation was he able to dissolve his inner critic and find deep inner peace. Today, his work explores somatic resonance, mythopoetic cognition, and experiments in graceful, non-linear living. He teaches the Somatic Resonance course and conducts one-on-one sessions in somatic and imaginal practices. River Kenna, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to be here with you. And I'd love to just start with setting a bit of context before we dive in. I think I ran across your work several times. One time I somehow landed on your site. Then I came across your presentation on the Stoa. And then another time I was researching something about Burbea and James Hillman. And I ran across a Twitter post you made. So usually when I keep coming across a person in this kind of a way, I take it as a synchronistic sign that I need to connect with them. And I think there's definitely an overlap in our interests from meditation, depth psychology, and imaginal practice. And I'd love to touch on all of these topics. But maybe we could first start with somatic meditation, since it seems like this has been a central part of your journey. Maybe you could speak how you came across somatic meditation, how it's been different from other meditations, and kind of the impact that it had on you.
Yeah, there's a few different versions of that story. Yeah, basic rundown is just, I hit my early 20s and despair was everywhere. And it was not a good time. I moved out to Korea and thought that would you move countries, you become a completely different person, and your life fixes itself, right? That's how the universe works. Not so much. Didn't work out well for me. I mean, in general, moving out there works well for me, but it did not solve my issues. But yeah, so at a certain point, I just kind of was like, all right, meditation is the thing people do for this. That is the thing that will solve all of my mental maladies. So I'll jump in and start meditating. Did that for a while, but the core problem that was just running underneath every other problem that I had was that my head was just running most of my life. Like in school, very handy. Like everything I've ever learned, thought, memorized was just running up here, spit it out onto a test, straight A's, golden, doing great. Who cares if your emotional well-being is totally shot? It's fine. But yeah, once I was out of school and my brain didn't have something else to just chew on all the time and keep churning through, it started chewing on me instead. And so when you get to all of this meditation instruction that is still very, very head focused, all of the usual, watch your thoughts pass by, you're standing by a river of your thoughts all going, and you are the open sky, your thoughts are just clouds drifting through. Again and again, we just, even on a word level, we hear thoughts doing, let's sharpen your mind, your thoughts. It just kind of kept all of the energy right up here, turning. And yeah, it gave me a little bit of mild relief, essentially, from that inner monologue chewing on me all the time. But it didn't fix the problem, and it seemed to be or I'd say it was organizing the problem. The problem didn't go away. It barely lessened, but it did become more organized, which was not nothing for sure. But yeah, I eventually just quit with that. Was kind of sick of trying these different meditation modalities that never quite seemed to work for me. And I don't remember how. I think it was just an Audible sale or something. I came across Reggie Ray's Somatic Descent program. And yeah, just started working through it, not really thinking a whole lot about it because I didn't want to think. But within a few months going by, I just kind of noticed day to day, like, oh, I don't have, that voice in my head just telling me that I'm worthless, that I'm not going to do anything, that, I'm not sitting awake at night staring at the ceiling because my brain won't slow down. None of that was really there anymore. And it took me a little bit to figure out, like, oh, okay, I guess that worked for something. Because, yeah, just day to day, my awareness was much more, I was checking in with my feet, checking in with my hips. How is my body actually feeling? Am I moving? What is it like down here rather than everything up here? And yeah, that just created enough of a shift and enough distance for me to finally, yeah, be able to do anything else, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people could resonate with what you're saying. I certainly can. And for me, there's moments in my life when my experience is more spacious and there's less of that kind of incessant mental chatter. And then there's times where it just kind of, it gets kind of strong. And I mean, there was something you were saying about, well, the thing that's interesting is how it doesn't seem like it was like a very sudden, just like, oh, this like sudden shift. It seems like it almost like happened at like gradually you just notice like, oh, that voice is no longer there. So what do you feel like it was just you learn how to pay attention to other aspects of experience rather than having all your focus going on the head? So now it's like your awareness was more spread out into other parts of your body just through doing this Reggie Ray's program.
Yeah, there's the like first image that comes to mind whenever I actually like internally time travel back to that time and try to feel what was going on. It was kind of just like a whirlpool, like everything was stuck up here. And then I just opened enough awareness further down where all of this churning stuff finally just whirlpooled back down. And yeah, the awareness could just spread out more, be a little more evened out. It was just nice. Yeah, my favorite metaphor for it these days is something like gravity wells, essentially, where anywhere that you put awareness in your body or out of your body, honestly, but anywhere you put your awareness kind of creates a little footprint. It adds a slightly deeper gravity well so that your awareness will go back to that place, fall back into that place just a little bit more often. So by default, all of us are walking around with enormous black holes in our head, right? Like our awareness is there so often for so long. There's a very deep footprint there. And the default is for all of our awareness to just keep falling back here, falling back here. And just with enough time and intention spent deeper in the body, in different areas of the body, it just kind of allows a bit more circulation of awareness. Your awareness naturally falls into slightly different patterns, which then allows each of those somatic gravity wells to deepen a little further, a little further, a little further. And at a certain point, yeah, you just kind of notice, like, I remember a big one for me was, did you ever watch BoJack Horseman?
Yeah, that's a good show.
Yeah, there's that episode that's just all his inner critic screaming at him essentially for 20 minutes. Just, you worthless piece of crap. You're a piece of crap. How dare you? And I remember the first time I watched that, I was like, oh, that looks really familiar. That's like painfully familiar. That hits me. And then I watched it again like a year later and I was like, stop whining, dude. You're doing this to yourself. Like I just couldn't relate to it at all. And yeah, that second watching hit me pretty strongly of like, oh, I remember this used to be like very poignant for me and really felt right there. But yeah, that was a big moment. That was good.
Yeah. And so how did that then translate into kind of this imaginal practice and this stuff with images? Because you did bring up the whirlpool and that's like the image stuff. And so I'm wondering how it transitioned into the kind of the work that you're really gravitating to now.
Yeah. So for me, it was incredibly direct. And when I work with people, if I point at it, it's pretty easy for most people to dip in from the somatic to like Can you sense the imagery that's sitting there? That there's like some sadness, some scenery in your hips, your elbow, your chest, whatever. No one to like guide me or tell me that that was any direction of experience. So it just kind of built up and slaps me in the face at a certain point. And there were a few of these early on where just imagery came really, really strongly and stayed there. And I didn't know what to do with it or what it was until I kind of fell back towards Jung and Hillman and a lot of this imagistic, shamanic journeying, psychoanalysis type stuff. And that helped me get a grip on what to do with it. But yeah, early on, like, I went to a meditation retreat. We were just sitting Vipassana, and it was a Goenka retreat. They were very, you might have lights or you might see things as you're sitting there. Ignore them, push them aside, don't do anything with them. And for several days of that retreat, like you're sitting meditation 10 hours a day. So for many of those hours each day, several days in a row, I had like a puma-headed goddess in white robes just kind of standing in front of me. Like, my eyes were closed and I was meditating, but like very strong sense of that image just being there a couple feet in front of me. But I just ignored it because they said, oh, you might see things, you might experience, there might be lights. Push past it. So I spent days just pushing past it while she patiently waited, standing in front of me. And then at a certain point, I guess, just got sick of it, left, and I got back to Vipassana. So that was nice. But now I'm a little peeved about that one. She probably had something to say if I would have known a bit more image work at the time, but oh well. But yeah, the big one that like hit for me is like, I can't ignore this anymore, is I was actually getting some body work done, some type of massage, I forget, some type of very specialized wooey massage thing going on. And for about 20 minutes, she was just kind of like cradling my head and neck in her hands and just kind of lightly manipulating it. And my shoulder just started to like this burning, piercing, terrible, terrible pain. So I kind of put all of my awareness there, just really sunk into like the breath, the awareness, let it all sit there, be in that pain. And it just kept crescendoing. It got really, really bad. It was one of the more painful things I've experienced. And at a certain point, a very difficult to describe experience came up. I'm pretty sure it's what people mean when they say past life memories, because it was not like fantasy. In fantasy, when you're fantasizing and imagining something, you can kind of watch it like slowly piece together and come in and come out of the fog. Here, it was more like turning the corner of a building and like there's just a view there. It's just suddenly there, like a memory. You think back to your 10th birthday party. It's there, fully formed. You've got it. This was that, but it was me from the point of view of like, a small village boy, like living on a mountain, crawling up and down. My legs were like shriveled and ruined, and I only had one good arm. But I was like crawling up and down, like basically, essentially begging in like a village mountain town or something. And yeah, so I'm sitting there on this massage table, like, okay, and this pain was very connected to it. Like the ruined arm was very much that pain was the sense. And yeah, so I'm just sitting there on the massage table, like, I don't have any referent for this experience. I don't know what it means to be sitting on a massage table, meditate into some shoulder pain, and then suddenly have like a bunch of fully formed narrative imagery just there and available. What is that? What do I do with it? And it did feel like there were a bunch of options available of going either full, these are my past lives, and I'm going to like explore all of my past lives and move through them, or go full, it's just brain static. There's nothing, move along, get out of here. But yeah, I kind of bounced between those, trying to like find something that felt actually, that felt like I could maintain integrity while like exploring that experience. Because neither of those felt, integrated to me. And what I eventually ended up more towards was a bunch of Jungian stuff with active imagination, moving through the imagery, not like thinking and analyzing the imagery, but like returning to it and kind of allowing it to unfold, allowing it to move, seeing what it had to say. Essentially, each image that comes up, just treat it the way that it presents itself. So if you're meditating and there's a puma-headed goddess hanging out, treat her like a puma-headed goddess. Treat that image like it is a puma-headed goddess visiting you. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to say? How are you going to treat that situation? And yeah, that led to a lot of very weird, non-linear, cool results. So I stuck with that approach, and it is a further developed version of that is still my approach on dealing with imagery and mythopoetic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a pretty profound experience to just be getting a massage and to start having this pain and then get this past life image. And it seems like what you're saying is that the body is the gateway to the imaginal, or at least that's been your experience. And yeah.
No, just that it's my gateway and it's a good gateway. Other people have different gateways, don't want to negate them, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense. So now, what is mythopoetic cognition? Because this is something else you talk about, and this is related to all this imagery, but maybe you could kind of unpack that a little bit more.
How much do I want to unpack that?
Well, I think I could say a little bit. I think in your Stoa presentation, you were talking about that, and it was called like mythopoetic cognition as the engine of the mind, and I think you got that phrase from a paper. I was reading it the other day. I think it's Stephen Asma.
Stephen T. Asma.
Yeah. So that paper was very interesting. It was short. It was not a difficult read, and it was very interesting. So I'm wondering how much of what you know is like kind of in what he was saying there. Like there's some overlap, but I don't know. I just find this idea of mythopoetic cognition as being this, like the kind of very primary, like the water we're swimming in that we don't see. Very fascinating.
Yeah. One of the big things for me with that phrase, and it's why I hunted down someone with university access to get me the PDF of that whole journal so I could print it out and annotate the thing, was just the phrase itself is it's a psychoactive phrase, mythopoetic cognition. Those are not things that we put together very often. Cognition tends to be, very scientific, very materialist. It's that thing of when people talk a lot about cognition, there's usually this background world, this background cosmology that they're inhabiting of materialism. The brain generates mind, and that's what cognition is. When we hear people talking about mythopoetics, that's generally much more floaty, artsy, spirity something, where, the world is maybe material, but there's also your soul and all this other stuff. I don't know why I'm giving that a sarcastic tone of voice. That's me. That's my stuff. But so just pushing those two together on its own is essentially an act of magic that just opens up, hey, we can all discuss this together. There's a bridge here. Like, we don't have to just you stay on your side with cognition and the brain generates mind, and we'll stay on our side with, consciousness filters through the body and brain or whatever other cosmologies we've got here. It allows an opening that lets us discuss, hey, let's look at mythopoetics. Let's look at cognition. Let's see how this whole thing works together. Let's unify this and look at it. And I was in Berlin for a residency last year, and I was walking through a park with someone, and I just wanted to gut check the phrase essentially. And I just asked hey, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase mythopoetic cognition? And she just stopped in her tracks to absorb the phrase. And that was pretty much, that let me know everything I needed to know about the reaction. But so without even getting too much into the specifics of what I mean by it, what Asma means by it, how much those overlap, literally just the words themselves are a magical opening that let us discuss this in a much yeah, much cooler way. Opens a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And so what do you really get from like what he's saying, from his paper and from your understanding of this? And it is it like it's the fact that myth, or like how Carl Jung talks about archetype, these are the things that are kind of the most primary, and they kind of end up driving our ways of looking at the world, and our ways of perceiving and seeing, and our ways of imagining. And that's I guess that's what's meant by like the water we're swimming in. Like there's always kind of an archetype, or there's always an image, or there's always this aspect of imagination that is dictating how somebody is perceiving the world, or what is real to them, even if it's something like I was using this example in another podcast I was doing, even something like like a rationalist, materialist scientist. There's still some kind of an archetype. There's still some kind of a image there, or an imagination of like, well, reality can be explained and reduced and dissected and completely understood through this way. Like there's a lens there. There's some kind of a lens there, even in that case.
Yeah, there's a phrase I really like. I forget who said it, but it's something along the lines of like, it is the privilege of the dominant religion of a day to claim that it is not a religion. And that's a lot. That's everything right there, essentially. But yeah, they were talking specifically, their area of study was like medieval Europe. And they were saying, if you kind of ask people, hey, are you religious? Are you a spiritual person? And the response would be something like, of course not. I'm a Christian. Like, I just believe in reality. I just believe in what's actual and real. God, the angels, Mary, all that stuff. Simple. That's it. And it's the exact same type of response you get today from scientific materialism, rationalism, et cetera, et cetera. You get a lot of this like, oh, I don't believe in any of that other stuff. Like, I don't have any faith. I can only believe in what I like see and know and what is real. And then they list off 10,000 things that they have never seen or experienced themselves, but they have faith that it exists. And this one I try to be more careful with, because like people really don't like having it pointed out to them that how many things they say are based on faith, and their faith that the world is a certain structure. Like, yeah, we'll figure this out. We'll get there. We know this and that. It's like, you have faith that the world has that structure and that we will continue to find that, and that there's nothing else. That's the big one, is the faith that that's all there is, that what can be measured, observed, spoken of is the whole thing. That's it. All of it right there. That's faith. That's an imaginative capacity that the type of world that you live in. None of us really know much about any of this. We only know what we can kind of, experience, and what we kind of pick to believe, what actually makes sense autochthonously to us. But yeah, no matter what the worldview is, we are swimming in particular narratives, particular images, particular cosmologies and mythologies about, this is the type of reality that I inhabit. I am in a place where these types of things are possible. These types of things are nothing out there. And a lot of us, not to get too into it, but we kind of talk over each other all the time about this. Even people, those of us who think we have very similar cosmologies to the people that we're talking to, when we start zeroing in on like what our actual phenomenological experience of the words we're using is, we often find that, like, just use one of the biggest examples, like the word God. No two people have the same experience of that word, even, right? Even just the most cartoonish ones are like, when I think God, I think that, that big hoax that they try to pull over us as kids, but now I'm a grown up, so I don't believe in fairy tales. Or God, yes, I believe in the Sky Father who looks down on us and created the world. Or yes, I believe in this kind of vague force that moves through the universe and unfolds. And those are three like hugely different ones. But even people within one of those buckets, where you both kind of believe that, the Tao and God are pointing at the same basic thing, when you start narrowing in really close on a lot of the words you're using in your sentences, you're not really talking about the same structure of the universe. They're close, but you kind of believe, each of you kind of believes something different about the fundamental nature of the reality that you are inhabiting. And that is mythopoetics, because you're making that up. You don't know. You are creating a myth of your life, or you are taking in and weaving the myths that you've been given. But there's that mythopoetic capacity is alive right there.
Yeah, I think that was a great example. It's like, you know, as many people as there are, that's as many interpretations of something like God, because it being something that it's somehow transcended. Or even me speaking now, it's like I can't help but use my interpretations and my words of what God may be. But it's like something that's unknown, and like you said, it's unknown, and then people just use their own ways of, how do I take this and something that's ineffable, something that can't be put into words, I'm going to somehow funnel it through this structure, through this body, through my experiences, and it's going to come out and it's going to be like, this is a picture of God, and then somebody else has a completely different picture, and it's that was a great example. And it's just it's really interesting how imagination, it's talked about as, and I think Hillman talks about it, how you have kind of the spiritual and the transcendent, and then you have the material, like in this world way of seeing, and then it's almost like imagination is that in between space that mediates it, and that allows us to see in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm curious then, how do you make sense of imaginal practice, or how do you think about it? What does that process look like for you when you're doing it with yourself and when you're doing it with other people?
Yeah. Imaginal practice is really difficult to teach and even talk about, just because everyone lives in their own little universe, essentially. Let's start there. So I have not found any better introduction to imaginal work than getting pretty good at dream work. And not like intellectual dream interpretation or pulling out the symbol dictionaries or anything like that, but more of a Hillman approach, where like you return to the imagery and allow it to unfold on its own. You kind of step into a place of listening to the unconscious, whether that is, whether the unconscious is just your personal, this little brain sorting its stuff out, or whether you're tapping into species-wide currents, cosmic currents, whatever the hell it is. And that will affect your practice. What you think you are doing will affect what you think is possible with it and what you choose to do with it, right? But yeah, if you step into just a listening space with the unconscious, starting with dreams, because those are the most obvious one. The unconscious just throws itself at us for a few hours every night. And yeah, least we can do is politely listen and hang out and see what's up there. But yeah, there's like a bunch of skills that you build with that, many of which basically come down to putting yourself into a more spontaneous gear, kind of switching the roles of intellect and intuition, where during the day, intellect runs the show. We might like have little intuitions or bubblings up gut feelings about things throughout the day, but we run them past our intelligence first before we act on them much, right? You get some intrusive thoughts about, I should throw that brick through that window. You run that past your intelligence first and go, no, that's not going to be the call that we take today. But thanks for saying that, unconscious. Thanks for bringing that up. Going to leave that for now. And in the dream work, which is not like in dreams itself, but when waking, you kind of meditate and drop back to the dream. You switch that relationship where spontaneous intuition really just picks up and leads the way, decides where you're going, what you're doing, and just letting everything unfold, letting it kind of happen around you and finding your part in it, finding how you flow with it. And stuff from the intellect might bubble up of like, oh, there's 7 swans in this dream. I remember 7 is a sacred number that means this, this, and these things. You're not just going to take that and follow it. You're not just going to run with that. You kind of run it past the intuition, and your intuition might go, yeah, that seems relevant here. Let's run with it. Or it might go, no, you're thinking too hard. Let's run after the swans. Or no, let's fly after the swans. We can do that here. It's fine. And so much of that is so intensely and directly personal that it can't really be like taught except by groups of people coming together and like talking about their experience together and kind of shining light on each other from that intuitive space. I was just watching the movie Arrival. Yeah, Arrival. And an early scene reminded me of kind of the usual attitude towards dream work, towards the imaginal, where the colonel comes in with like this tape recorder of the aliens speaking, and it's just noises, the raw, that type of stuff. Hits play, puts it in front of the linguist, and it's just like, what do you make of that? It's like, I don't know. I need to like be there and talk to them or see them. He's like, well, you didn't need that with the Farsi translations. Well, I already know Farsi. I don't know an alien language. There's a similar thing here with dream work where people kind of expect this, dream dictionary attitude towards it of like, just bring your dreams to anyone. And there's like a set of systematic symbols and dynamics that you can just plug and play for any given person. That's not how it works. Everyone kind of has to get this feeling for their own inner landscape, for their unconscious, for the dynamics that are alive and at play consistently for them, and the texture of those, like how those feel in your mind so that you recognize them when they come up. Like, just to give a couple banal examples of like, oh, I had that dream of the tiger chasing me, and the flavor of that fear was very, very similar to the texture of the fear in that dream where my dad was screaming at me. Let's try going back to some memories of my dad screaming at me. Okay, yep, that is the same thing. And that reminds me of when my pastor used to scream at me. Okay, so there's something about like authority and anger in this territory. And you wouldn't get that from someone else teaching you how to do the imaginal, how to run your dream work. In the worst case scenario, you get something like, oh, tigers symbolize whatever, and yelling symbolizes this and that. So let's just Sudoku it out, and here's the interpretation of your dream printed on a little fortune cookie thing, and you're good, go home. But no, it takes you just kind of have to attend to the inner scenery and urges and desires that the unconscious bubbles up. Put yourself in the space of attending to those, listening to those, letting them come through. And you kind of just learn the language over time. And that's just how the communicative process there has to work. So you just figure it out.
Yeah. So, what's coming up for me is just thinking about my own dreams and like writing dreams down and then trying to figure them out or try to understand them. And one of the ways of doing this is like active imagination. And I don't know if that's it. That was like Carl Jung's approach to dream work. And maybe that's part of what you're speaking about. For me, what I've realized and why I probably haven't done more dream work is because I would literally be like, well, there's like a part of me is like, oh, this is a rabbit hole that may be taking me nowhere. Like that, there would be like that kind of fear. And sometimes I wonder if that's just not being able to let go of kind of the rational linear mind of wanting everything structured and ordered and neat and predictable and like, oh, like this is the clear insight, like this dream and this is exactly what it meant. And it seems like what you're saying, that there's this capacity that you have to learn between the intellect and the intuition, learning how to balance them and learning how to feel into like, oh yeah, this thought is actually resonant with my intuition. Like, yeah, I'm on the right track, or no, I'm thinking too much. I'm gripping up and I'm kind of killing the image and overly interpreting it. It seems like there's some kind of balance there. that you're talking about?
Yeah, what I tend to call that is systematic and spontaneous mode, that there's like two basic thinking modes that we have, one of which is where we pretty much always are, systematic. That's we need logic and linear things and language we can name and count and trace. Spontaneous is much more, yeah, open and weird. John Keats had an idea of, was it negative capacity or negative capability? I think negative capability,
Yeah.
which he essentially described as, yeah, being able to like stay in mystery and paradox and uncertainty without irritably reaching after facts and reason. So, yeah, that thing where, okay, there's something here. It seems very non-linear, strange, uncertain. I can either just sit there and allow it to kind of happen, and maybe it will unfold somewhere, maybe it won't. Maybe it will unfold somewhere, but not for like 5 years until the next piece falls into place. Or I can just take this uncertainty and kind of grab it and rearrange it however I want, and yeah, play Sudoku with it basically, to where you can just rearrange it, get a straight line and a rational answer that you know, and then you're good. And yeah, James Hillman said a lot about this, particularly with dream interpretation stuff, where my favorite example from him was you dream of a police officer chasing you, and you've got like all this fear and guilt, and you wake up and you say, okay, the police officer is my guilt complex. I've just got a bunch of guilt issues from growing up Catholic, and my mom was always guilt tripping me and all of that. So that's what it was. Good. And yeah, what James Hillman said there is, you are safe, you are protected, you have interpreted the dream, and nothing, absolutely nothing has happened. There was no transformation there. None of that energy of like that felt sense of grief, shame, fear didn't actually get to complete itself and metabolize and move somewhere and do what it needed to do. You just grabbed it, said, I don't like uncertainty, and said, guilt complex. Let's pin that butterfly here, put the label on it, and we're good. But yeah, that essential dynamic, wild common in dream work. It is the main mode of dream work. If you say dream work to people, they immediately think of, oh yeah, dream interpretation, where like you pull out the little symbols and figure out what everything means. Right, yeah, that. Like, no, that's my enemy. It's my mortal enemy.
Yeah. So for you, when you're doing this work, you have a dream, right? You write it down, and then you come back and start feeling into those images or the things that happened. Is that the way you do it? And then it seems like there has to be this capacity to stay in this uncertainty and this nebulosity for some time. But it also feels like, well, maybe you've had dreams, right? That there were certain images and you stayed with them for, many sessions or maybe many weeks or many months. At some point, is there ever some point where there is kind of a closure? There is a like, oh yeah, that made sense. And it was pointing to this dynamic in my psyche or this kind of unresolved thing that was there. And now I can move on to new images and new things. Or is it just like, the bear always comes to me in my dreams, it pops up and I'm just in this continuous dialogue with the bear. And then there's the puma and then there's the swan and there's all these different images and animals and things that pop up and I'm continuous relationship with them. It's forever open-ended.
Oh, yeah, it's a bit of a grab bag. And that's part of where just like the negative capability, spontaneous mode, right hemisphere, if you're a McGilchrist fan, that whole zone kind of like becomes very important because patience is the main superpower there. One example, yeah, I've on my Substack, I've got 2 articles about this. There's the most recent one, I think it's just called The Big Dream, and it's one that I had a couple years ago. And then there's an older example. I think the second article I ever published, I think it's called Towards Dream Return or something like that. But yeah, just to give a quick version of like the best example of both for me. I was in a state for a year, 2 years. Yep, Hanoi and Da Nang. So that would have been 2 years where like a deer kept kind of coming around and hanging around my dreams. And I don't know, he was just kind of there. And I would try to like go back in and let it unfold and talk to the deer, figure out something again and again. And yeah, he'd always run away, or like I couldn't hold the image and it would just glitch out, or nothing satisfying would happen at all. But I just kind of stayed with it and didn't bother myself too much about it. And then a couple of years later, there was this whole big dream. Yeah, long explanation of it on my Substack. Short explanation being that the deer showed up, said like, "Hey, I've got something to show you." And he seemed like a little peeved with me. I'd done something wrong to him. I don't know, maybe I just wasn't experienced enough or something. Whatever part of my psyche that was pissed off a bit. Yeah, basically said, "Hey, come here, got something to show you." Took me to the top of a hill, and there was a landscape with like two pretty clear options. In the dream, I went with the option to the right, explored that. It was a whole thing. In the dream return, I came back up to the hilltop and decided to explore the other side, see what was up over there. And that was a whole big thing. And that one is still actually unfolding to certain degrees. But one of the big moments in working with that dream was I had spent a lot of years unconsciously. I would have like protested if you had described this to me at the time. I would have denied it a lot. But I was essentially looking for what conveyor belt to put myself on in life, of like, do I go and join a Zen monastery and put myself on the Zen conveyor belt? Do I go learn pranayama in India and put myself on whatever conveyor belt that takes me on? Do I don't know, go back to evangelicals, see what they've got. And that was kind of part of the question that I brought to one of the figures in this dream of, what do I do? Where do I go? What's like the path and the thing for me? And yeah, he kind of just looked straight through me, and without words, through more just like imagery and impression and narrative, kind of asked me that, of just like, why do you want to put yourself back on a conveyor belt? And why do you think that you are not on a path right now? Like, you're doing somatic meditation and shamanic drumming and dream return, lying on the floor right now, conversing with a dream bison that came to you like a couple of years ago in a dream. What about this doesn't seem pathy to you? And within like a couple weeks, that entire issue in my life had just evaporated. It was just gone. There was no more of the like clenchy, graspy, what do I do? What's the thing? Where do I go? What's the right path? I was just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm doing my thing and it's going to keep unfolding. And if I stay with it, that's been kind of a totem for me lately, just the phrase, the only sin is to leave the dynamic. Stay with the dynamic. Stay with what's unfolding. That's the path. And yeah, really cannot overemphasize enough, like how much before that my mind was shaped and just like pushed directly at, what do I do? What like preset path can I put myself on? And how just cleanly that broke off within a couple weeks of like, oh, I have a different mind now. It just doesn't organize itself in the same way along that particular vector. Like, I can just do stuff now. It's fine. So yeah, that one's an example of both, where there was a deer that hung out for a couple of years, didn't really seem to be going anywhere, whatever. And then it all did lead to this one dream that had a very, very, probably one of the clearest demarcations I've had of like, this, working with this dream led to this thing. And there's a spectrum there. There's for sure a spectrum.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because that seems like a powerful shift, and that it seems like we all have these kind of nagging patterns or these parts of ourselves that are kind of hard to even see. It's like because they're unconscious, because they're hidden, and it seems like there's these images and dreams. It's those parts of ourselves talking to us, trying to reveal something and show something to us. But what we often do in our culture is kind of dismiss that. And I've seen that in myself too, of just because I would write dreams down, and then I'm like, well, what do I do with this? Because this makes no sense. I'm like, all right, I can spend like, just going through that inner, like there's a book called Inner Work, and it talks about active imagination. And it was like, you write down every single image, and then it's like, what does this image mean to you? And then you feel into it. And it was just like, oh, this is going to take hours. Like I could spend hours doing this and end up nowhere. And I think I think that's a common fear that people have, but it seems like your experience has been that when you do stick with it, and that you allow this dynamic to keep unfolding, it can actually have powerful shifts where there's these unresolved patterns resolve themselves and kind of disappear, and there's maybe more wholeness or ease or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, just to connect a couple dots there, like one of the things that makes it like hard to advertise dream work or like shill it in any way is there's not like a really linear, with meditation, they'll often say a lot of this, like, you do it for like this many years and you'll basically get somewhere around this milestone. Continue for this many hours and you'll be somewhere in this range. You can't so much do that with dream work. Much more nonlinear, much more strange. But also like flip side of that is when it does strike, it's kind of like lightning when it does strike, because it's just immense and powerful, and not as much the like, oh, I think there's been like a gradual shift. I'm doing a little less of the, it's like, no, there's the thing. You did it. Nothing happened for a year and a half, but now there's this. So, yeah. And yeah, so that just makes it hard for most of us to like grasp and want to do that because it's not very predictable, right? Secondly, just connecting dots on my interests here, this is another part of why I like somatic meditation so much as an introductory practice for any type of inner work is it builds a lot of patience. Like there's just a deep grounded well of like, oh yeah, I can just be in my body. And at first, like on the scale of minutes and hours, I can sit here and do this. Moving forward, it gets onto the scale of like months and years of, okay, this is going to be something that takes up the next couple of years of my life. And that's going to have to be fine. Not going to need to rush that or push it or anything. And that's been huge for me. I've always been very impatient. And I've just noticed more recently that like time scales that would have horrified me at 25 are now just like, yeah, that's going to be the next 2 years. I'm not going to try to like sit down and hammer all through it in a weekend. It's going to need to unfold, and that's going to be uncomfortable and weird. And secondly, somatic meditation is also the best inroad I have found yet to what I call spontaneous mode or negative capability or whatever other terms we have for that. Just more like open, patient, not grasping for straight lines type of mindset, which is also a thing that A, makes it easier to handle the unpredictability, and B, just literally makes the process work better, which is that's always a frustrating thing to tell people is like, if you get yourself into the space where you're no longer like grasping for the result will come a lot faster. That's frustrating. And I get it. But yeah, somatic meditation is the best way I've found so far into that space. So strikes me as a uniquely good like starting point or foundation point for inner work.
Yeah, what came up when you were just speaking was this like Ram Dass quote. It was like, you can have whatever you want as soon as like you let go of it. He's like, you can have all the power you want as soon as you let go of it, you can have all the power that you want. And I think that is very difficult. That paradoxical kind of thing is very difficult for us to accept. And yeah, this capacity, this linear, like needing this kind of progression and needing to know where we're going and how this step leads to that step and kind of obsession with that way of functioning, which I definitely have a lot of that in my own psyche and this impatience. So I can see how this, imaginal work will be challenging for many people, but also at the same time, very rewarding because it allows us to experience different aspects of reality or a different way of relating to reality.
Yeah. Yeah, that just reminded me actually one point I skipped there. Another frustrating bit about a very related frustrating bit about dream work is that you don't so much get to control like what your outcome is. Like with a lot of stuff like meta meditation, you sit down, you kind of know what you're doing and where you're going. You're cultivating love, self-love, love for others, etc. And for most inner work, there is kind of that, I know what I'm working towards and doing. And in a lot of the imaginal work, you get stuff like mine, where I wasn't even aware of the problem that I had organized my entire mind towards, like which preset paths, which conveyor belts are there. I didn't realize that that was like a dynamic I was holding. And so like I wouldn't have known to work on that or chip away at it. But in one stroke, like I learned that I had that problem and that I now no longer had that problem. So that aspect of like not even being able to control, like I'm going to work on having more confidence through dream work. No, you're just going to work on dream work and you get what you get. But I promise you, what you get will be amazing. But also you don't get to really choose what it is.
Yeah. That also reminds me, like there's this saying, and people have with ayahuasca, it's like you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. So it's like that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm always amused with psychedelics. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I'll go in with like a plan. Like, this is what I'm directing my intention at. And like 5 minutes in, the psychedelic is just like, no, we're not doing that today. We're doing this thing. Like, all right, we're doing that thing.
yeah. I find that interesting how usually with like ceremonies and when used in a conscious way, there's always like set an intention. And I remember just like setting like the intention. I'm like, my intention is to just allow it to allow it to take me where it takes me, because at some point that's what I realized. Like no matter what I say, it's like it ends up being about something. You know, you come with a problem and it ends up being about something completely different.
Yeah.
So
that's where it needs to go.
Yeah. So the other thing that was kind of coming up with me is thinking about imaginal work, and I've been kind of engaging more recently with parts work, and that's also kind of, let's say, one of the more popular psychotherapeutic modalities now, and a lot of people are working with it. And I'm just wondering how you see parts work being different or similar to imaginal work.
I would have had a lot to say about this a year ago. Less so now. Yeah, I would class imaginal work and more broadly mythopoetic work as like a very vast umbrella, and parts work as being somewhere under that umbrella, a useful little section of that umbrella that, yeah. Where I'm coming from personally is I did a lot of this parts work type stuff, the stuff that's aimed at, before parts work was real, like before I'd ever heard of any IFS or parts work or that type of stuff. And then once I had like hack and slashed my way through it, figuring it out piecemeal on my own, suddenly everyone was super into IFS and like had all these little textbooks for it. And I was like, man, y'all cheating. You didn't do it the hard way. You didn't spend hours that you didn't have to chipping away at shit. So there's like a layer of frustration under there, just like, you kids didn't work for it. Come on. But more generally, yeah, I think that parts work is one of those things. I'm increasingly, we'll see how long this lasts, but it's been, I don't know, 8-9 months so far. I'm increasingly seeing a lot of this inner work stuff as coming down to systematic and spontaneous mode that I talked about earlier, where most things that you are doing, if they allow you an entryway to some type of more spontaneous mode of being, more negative capability, increasing your capacity for, just being with what is there and allowing it to unfold and not trying to rearrange it and everything. If it allows you entry to that and you can use the technique from that place, excellent, great, doing wonderful. But every single technique that you can do that with you can also do the flip side with, where you kind of use it as a tool to beat yourself up with and cut yourself into a particular shape. Because that opposite of the spontaneous mode, the systematic mode, one of the main things that it does is solves problems, which means that it has to turn things into problems so that it can solve them. And when you turn that capacity on yourself, suddenly you're the problem, right? And you've got your whole psyche turned against itself, trying to work itself as the problem and the solution. And that just gets exhausting and breaking. And for parts work in particular, I have seen it go both ways very strongly. And I've seen people come out, very strongly against parts work, of like, it's evil and it splits you down the middle and cuts you into pieces and reinforces all of these splits in your parts. And then other people going like, oh no, it's been like really lovely for me. It kind of allowed me into more like an open chamber with all of my many selves, and fine with them all being there. And they'll fight about it back and forth. And it's like, no, you're both 100% right. Just one of you didn't have entry to the spontaneous space before working with that modality, and the others of you did. So one of you was using it as a tool to cut yourself up. The other one just using it spontaneously, allowing it to unfold. Yeah, that's my long answer on parts work. Excellent tool that can be misused like every other tool.
Yeah. What's coming up for me, and you're pointing to this frame of like what is the frame that you're looking through, and you could use anything through a different lens and a different frame. And what you were saying is kind of reminding me of, there's this guy, this coach Steve March, and he has a training program called Alethea Coaching. I'm actually taking it right now. I'm getting towards the end. And,
nice.
And part of that system is working with parts work, and his kind of the big idea of his system is that he says a lot of coaching modalities are functioning through the frame or the paradigm of self-improvement, right? There's a problem. There's something I need to fix about myself. I need to get better. There's somewhere I need to go. And the way he frames his coaching is he calls it the unfolding paradigm. So it's like you allow things to unfold without necessarily trying to get there. And to me, that sounds very similar to what you're saying with the systematic and the spontaneous kind of frame or mode of looking at things.
I've got a mini ebook that's mostly done at the moment on spontaneous and systematic mode. And one of the first things that's in there is just like, everyone who spends a bunch of time in their own experience comes around to some version of this independently for some reason. And do you read Sasha Chapin at all?
No, I don't believe I do. Yeah.
He had an article a couple months ago that was just like, hey, I've been meditating a bunch and I kind of found these two ways that the mind behaves. I'll call them problem and suchness. And it maps exactly to spontaneous systematic mode. A bunch of, the most famous one is Ian McGilchrist, the left and right brain hemispheres. I have no idea if the neuroanatomy of that is anywhere near correct, but when I read through the experiences that it maps to, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's very directly describing an extremely real thing of these two spaces you can be in. Even back to like Proust wrote about art and habit and matches up really well. Federico Campagna did a Technic and Magic to reality settings that we can live in. Again, they just map super well. I think pretty much anyone who just spends time like, what is experience and what do I do with it, can't help but notice these two broad classes of, experience, cognition, whatever they are.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading, that's still one of my favorite books, The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, and just like reading his book and like it landing so, like there was so much resonance. I'm like, yeah. Like, I know exactly what he means by this kind of left brain dominant functioning because I'm in it so much. And when I'm in it too much, that's when I start suffering. And it's like, how do I start? What are the activities and things that I can do where I can kind of balance this out? And then also this idea of how, he talks about this right brain function actually being the primary, but it's like somehow our culture or the way we've developed after the Enlightenment is we've been functioning through kind of like the left brain is took the steering wheel. and that's the way we've been functioning. And it seems like, yeah, it seems like this is also what you're pointing at. And it's like, how do we find this balance? And maybe imaginal work and dream work and these kind of things is a way to balance things out for this kind of hyper rational way that so many of us are living.
Yeah, and the somatics are really directly related as well. There's a quote from McGilchrist. I don't remember which book, and again, I have no idea about the neuroanatomy of this, whatever.
Yeah.
But his quote is something along the lines of like, only the right hemisphere has a full body image and full body experience. The left hemisphere experiences the body as something that it is driving around and basically experiences it as any other object in space. That, there's a notebook here and your hand is here. They're all just objects that you can manipulate and control that exist literally and figuratively beneath you, right? And only the right hemisphere has the like mode of being a body, of not just having a body, but being one as a mode of existence in that full body image. And yeah, that's been really helpful to explaining to people who, a lot of people really like McGilchrist. So that's a good one to like throw at them, of just like somatic meditation, get into that full body image. It gives you this backdoor into right hemisphere, negative capability, spontaneous mode. That thing gives you that backdoor to the thing.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that point in the Stoa presentation. I think that was like a good find, like very resonant with what you were saying. And I guess I'm curious too. This resonates. You talk about this, that you're kind of working on experiments in non-linear living. And imaginal work, it seems to be like one of those things. But I'm wondering what other things you're doing in your life, and then also how do you think about goals, or how do you think about moving towards something? Like if there's like, oh, there's something I want to achieve, or there's something I want to do. Because I find for myself, like the achiever is a very strong part for me, right? And that is more of like the left brain, like getting somewhere, or like even with this podcast, it's like there's I can enjoy the podcast and I could not look at the views and not look at the data so much and just enjoy the conversations I'm having. But then there's also the part of like, all right, like I want to look at the data. I want it to grow. I want it to get somewhere. I want to, I could be bigger. I can have more leverage. I can potential to speak to anybody I want, So it's like, how do you balance that kind of goal setting and achieving and getting somewhere and in your own life? Or is that maybe?
Yeah, that one's.
Hey, go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's hard. So yeah, the thing you're referencing there, experiments in nonlinear living, that started as an article, experiments in nonlinear productivity. And the thing there was essentially that like, yeah, I've moved away from this systematic left brain, whatever thing, this mode of being that was responsible for most of my productivity, most of my life, that I had like a goal to achieve, and also that I would kind of, beat myself up and cut myself into particular shapes to shove it towards those goals and leave other parts of me out because they didn't fit with those goals. And I lost a lot of my capability to do that. It is just not there anymore. Unfortunately, I am unwilling to mutilate my psyche in that way anymore, which does kind of suck sometimes, because I'm like, oh, I've got, deadlines. I work for myself. It's all just like the course and writing and stuff, but deadlines that matter and that I should be keeping. And they just whip right by, and like, I didn't have the fuel for that, and I don't know how to get it back. And what I was figuring from those experiments was essentially that there are other types of fuel available, but that they work quite differently from the original ones. The really like self-coercive stuff doesn't so much work anymore, but there are things like just interest and curiosity and yeah, just love for the subject, cooperating with other people, all of these things that do drive me, that do spark up some eros to like, yeah, let's go towards that. Let's unfold that. Let's move with that. But they are not as straight line and reliable. I can't put them on a deadline the same way that I can with other things. And I can't like, yeah, just pin them down for like, today is a work day and we're doing 8 hours straight through. It has to be much more attuning to what wants to happen, to where that curiosity wants to go, and to allowing it to take its own schedule and its own framework. And that whole project has since morphed into what I'm now calling devotional productivity, which is interesting. It's essentially taking like an imaginal approach towards this, where like, yeah, just to shorten down the basics of like, why am I doing this? What am I like devoting myself to? What is this devotion actually going towards, right? And I have to figure that out for each project, for each thing I do. Otherwise, it's really hard to direct myself towards it. Because if I get to the end of a project and I'm like, all right, what was that for? Money, status, acclaim. Okay, that doesn't feel good. That wasn't great. And I'm not going to be able to like work on that very much. But if I can like dig deeper and imaginally find like the core of this project, what am I working on? What am I going towards? And then start to work with it as it shows up. And it might show up as a scene, as a figure, a person, anything like that, and kind of weave a relationship with it. It's kind of like having a coworker for every single one of those projects, and the coworker is the project itself. And it does get into, these are experiments, so do get odd sometimes, but they do end up with me like having conversations with the work itself, where like I'm kind of imagining this avatar of how the work shows up to me. Like, okay, there's this booklet that I've been writing for a while. I'd like to get it across the finish line pretty soon. Dipping in, what is the actual devotion for towards that? And it's mostly towards future work and towards other people participating in future work. There's a few building blocks that I need to get out there. If I want really good coworkers in a few years, I need like a pool of people who are familiar with particular ideas. So I need to get those out there now so that they're baked in a few years, right? So it starts to come into this figure of, okay, what is my sense of the work that wants to be done 5 years from now, of like what's coming into view? And yeah, I get just this kind of vague, shadowy shape with like impressions of particular emotional resonance coming off it, of things around, yeah, let's just say like nobility, uprightness, being, yeah, having some integrity in the world and not making so many compromises with what you do and how you do it. So that's kind of a core of it. So then I take that figure, concretize it a bit more. It's like, okay, if I try to really pull it out of the fog and get something to relate to there, I'm getting, and now from here, I'm just kind of making things up. Let's say Charles. He seems like a Charles. So then I've got this figure coming out of the fog. Name is Charles. It's got a particular look to him. I'm starting to sense things about the personality of the work, the personality of the project. And with startlingly little work of just like shaping the intention of this project and what the project wants to be, I've now got like a little voice on my shoulder as I'm going through it of like, does that paragraph work? No, not really. Should I be working on this today? Actually, it would be better if you took a break for today. You're a little burned out. Okay, but how about today? Can we work that? Yeah, let's work through lunch. And if you don't have this done by bedtime, you're going to like stay up late and keep working on this. And yeah, there's just some odd imaginal flavor to like finding the project itself. And yeah, finding your devotion to it, finding what the fuel source is, where it's actually coming from, and allowing yourself to befriend that and let it unfold in its own way. It's experimental at the moment, but going better than before, better month by month.
Yeah, I have a lot of resonance with this notion of what you're calling devotional productivity. It seems very powerful. And I think for some of the other threads that were coming up for me is like, you know, working on something and losing interest, or working, or like there's a party that's procrastinating and you're just like not getting things done. And I think in our culture, like in the dominant culture, there's this thing like, oh, procrastination is bad, or you got to push through. I know for myself, I've always been about like pushing through, and if things get hard, you just got to keep going. But it seems, especially in like creative work, like I know you're doing a lot of writing, I'm doing writing, creating podcasts, and also these kind of things, and just reading a lot of different books and exploring a lot of ideas. And that just doesn't seem to work very well. Like trying to force things, trying to keep pushing forward. And I'm really digging this kind of way of that you're presenting, of like talking to the work, right? And imagining and really getting deep down to the why. Like, why am I doing this? And I think I've been like, I think there's a lot of things I've been doing because there's a sense of I need to do this. Like I need to write a weekly newsletter, right? For a while I was doing that. And then I got to a point where I'm like, well, why? Like, why do I have to do it? Because if I don't send out a weekly newsletter, I'll somehow be forgotten, or like whoever's reading my stuff, they're not going to hear it. I'm like, what if I sent out a monthly newsletter? And that there was way more resonance to that. I'm like, well, actually, I could make the monthly newsletter way better. And I wouldn't have that pressure of like having to write every week, because there's already a lot of things on my plate and a lot of things that I'm doing. And like this weekly newsletter, it doesn't feel very alive to do it. It kind of feels like I have to do it. And I've been just pushing through it. So there is something that you're saying that's really resonating with, just really getting down to the why. And yeah, and just kind of following what's alive in you. It's like, well, I was reading this book, and it was, last week there was a lot of resonance, but now I don't know. I just feel I don't have that same resonance. So maybe I need to put it down and move towards something else. I think there's definitely something in that things not being linear that's powerful and overlooked in the way we work and the way we look at productivity, for the most part.
Yeah, a lot of that feels, creative work is hard, man. Did you already, or are you going to? You were going to talk to Rosa Lewis, right?
How did you know? Did you speak to her?
Or was that someone else?
No, I actually heard.
Yeah, we talk every week. We have weekly calls of like that are supposed to be like project management, helping each other, but mostly just turn into talking about whatever's going on. But yeah, that's like a thing that has come up many times in our conversations, is like the creative aspects of a lot of this work, like just take their own time and their own path to unfold. And the more you try to force them, A, the more difficult the work gets, and B, kind of the worse it gets. Like it just doesn't unfold the way that it needs to. I've got one example just from today. Like, there's a project that I wanted to have done months ago, and I feel like I'm finally in the like last stages of it now. And just today I rediscovered like the perfect structuring metaphor that I need to run through it and really cohere it. And yeah, that just came today, like probably 3 or 4 months after I would have liked to have it put out there, but it took its own time, and that's just how it needed to go and how it needed to be. So yeah, I don't know. I'm getting better at just like trusting the process, trust the process. But I am getting better at just having that faith that like, you know what, over and over again, I try to structure these projects to come how I need them to come. And then they don't, and something way better pops up. So I'm getting better at just kind of trusting that, you know what, this project isn't working right now. That's fine. I will come back to it later, and it will continue developing whatever it needs to be. I've got a joke article set up that we'll see if I actually finish, but I'm calling it Project Necromanagement, basically of trying to bring projects back from the dead and dealing with projects where that aliveness just hasn't quite gotten there. And which ones do you return to? When do you return to them? Is there a way to like kind of reinfuse them to I don't know, just get them moving a little bit, or is it completely just leave them dead until they come alive on their own? What is the range there?
Yeah, yeah, I resonate with it and definitely want to work more in that kind of direction. So I appreciate that approach that you're bringing in. Yeah, I actually uploaded to the podcast. Supposed to be what Rosa is supposed to be released today in a couple hours, and yeah, she's a treasure. She's really
Nice.
really dig her energy, and yeah, I saw that you guys do stuff together. It was almost like I came across both of you in a similar time frame, and I was just like, oh yeah, this is like this person. Their ideas look cool. This person, and oh, they're actually. So I see you get there's like actually a whole bunch of you that are working on Imaginal work together. I think she created a whole group, so that's really cool. And there's a couple of more things I wanted to kind of ask you as we kind of start winding down here, but I think I ran across a tweet you had mentioning some of the thinkers that had impacted you, and I couldn't find this. I found this tweet, and then I couldn't find it later, but I think it was something about Carl Jung, James Hillman, and Burbea, and I think you were basically saying that you didn't agree with all aspects of their teachings, and I'm actually really interested. I'm really interested in these three particular thinkers, Jung, Hillman, and Burbea, because they're also thinkers that I very much admire and explore a lot of their work. So I'm just curious, what about those three thinkers? What that they taught that you agreed with, or what that you've seen differently than they do or did?
Yeah, and internet tweaked a little bit there, but the three thinkers are Jung, Hillman, Burbea.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Short versions. I don't know. Yeah, everyone's human and everyone is their own person. So, like, my disagreements with them are not like where I would fight and debate them over it. It's more just like, oh, that was probably true for you. Yeah, for Jung, one of them is just I feel like because Jung set the example so much on the Jungian tradition and everything that followed, there is this, it limited the field quite a bit because he made the decision to essentially take what was a lot of mystic and shamanic material, like the Red Book. He said himself that like all of his later book came from his later work came from trying to explain his experiences from the Red Book. And the fact that he decided to do that in an academic context to academics in academic fashion, A, is entirely understandable and probably was the right call for him. B, set a lot of limitations moving forward. And I think a lot of those limitations are finally coming undone with the publication of the Red Book in 2009 and the Black Books, 2018, a few years ago, whenever. And so, yeah, I feel like there was a 50-year delay that didn't really need to happen, but that did happen on a lot of the possibilities of the psyche and possibilities of wholeness. And I really, really dislike the word and term and general conceptual basis of shaman, but for lack of a better word, modern Western shamanism got set back 50 years by him deciding to kind of tone everything down, keep it as palatable to academics as possible, while still, I mean, it's not like he didn't push against the boxes of academia. He did, and he paid for it over and over again. But even with that, I do feel like that decision had repercussions, and we're on a bit of a delay switch on dealing with those. Hillman, love Hillman. The best thing, as with everyone, the best thing about him is the worst thing about him. He's just very like drifty and flowy on a lot of stuff. He does not give much by way of like, hey, I've talked about all this imaginal stuff and the place of the gods and the psyches and a polytheistic psyche and all these things. What do you do with that? I'm going to give these 8 hours of lectures on alchemy and alchemical psychology. What you going to do with that? And there's very little by way of like, here's how you start working with this. Here's what you can do. And also a lot of what you can do is go to like, what's the word? I'm missing the adjective, doesn't matter. Go to therapists who like are aligned with that type of work and play it out with them, and who are familiar with Hillman, and a lot of them who worked under him and stuff. But also he then spends a lot of time shitting on therapy. Rightly, I get him. But he kind of closes off a lot of doors there by not giving his own instructions on how to take this and work with it. And that's partially my criticism, because I had so much imagery coming up and no one would tell me what to do with it or anything. Then I finally find Hillman, and he's describing a lot of this very precisely and doesn't give much to do with it by way of direction. So yeah, that's one of my little tweaks with him. You could have just like left a little pamphlet, bro. By the way, here's some exercises. Try this thing.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. He's great. And then, yeah, Burbea essentially just worked in Buddhism for decades and then read a shit ton of Hillman and then just mixed it all together and talked for, I don't know, 90 hours of recordings or however many recordings he's got going on. But yeah, absolutely love Burbea. My main tweak with him, which again, this was correct for him and is very much demonstrably not correct for most people, is that he has a huge number of prerequisites in Buddhist stuff for the soul-making Dharma. Like every one of his retreats, soul-making Dharma-related things are like, you should just with at least the first 4 jhanas and an understanding of emptiness and reach this, that, the other thing, in order to start doing the soul-making work, this imaginal type work. And I have seen people discouraged by that, like, oh, I'll get into Imaginal, but first I've got to do more jhana training and more meta and more this, that, the other thing, which is just demonstrably false. And if you're doing exactly what Burbea was doing, soul-making Dharma, it makes sense. If you're learning from him, that he would want you, because it's new stuff, he's making it up as he goes. So of course, be on the same platform as me so that we can be eye to eye talking about this. But I feel like, and this isn't his fault, this is more just some cultural something, but there's not a lot of, I don't know, 3-dimensional agency or something around people's ability to like look at someone and recognize that's where they were. That is not like gospel law of the universe of what must be done. That is a functional requirement of him being able to communicate with and teach you. And yeah, that one I've interacted with a lot of people. I was running a Sangha for a while of, we would listen to Burbea stuff together and practice together and meet weekly. And yeah, I've just seen a lot of people kind of pushed back by there's so many requirements and I can't really get into the Imaginal till I've done all this other stuff. And it must be such a wild advanced practice that I couldn't possibly, like, no, man, like, you're there and you're already doing it. We can just teach you how to like pay attention to how you're doing it and do it better. It's already here. You don't need to be in the 8th jhana to figure this out.
Yeah, I know on a lot of his talks, it's like, oh, you have to, there's a lot of prerequisites. And then he would basically say that he would say that often, that soul making is like an advanced practice. Recently, though, I was listening to a talk, and he actually, in the talk, he did say that some people may start with, like, even though he sees it as being an advanced practice, like some people may start at soul making. And I think that's where he was pointing to, that this kind of inner work isn't linear. Whereas like some people start with meta, some people start with concentration, some people start with insight, some people start with imaginal work. So he did mention that I did hear him mention that, but I do see what you're pointing at with making it like this. You have to do all these things before you can get to a soul-making retreat. And then that can be very discouraging because, that can take years to develop all those capacities and skills that are.
Yeah, it's not a short list.
Yeah.
Put on that.
Yeah. So I guess the one last question I'll kind of ask here is, what what are you working on right now? Is there any projects? I know you've been kind of engaging with that group of practitioners with this imaginal work. You're doing a lot of writing on your Substack. You do this, I think it's called, what is Somatic Resonance course? Yeah, the Somatic Resonance course you're teaching. What are you working on now? What's happening for you? What are you moving towards?
Kind of a lot. A big part of my working process appears to be that I like get several different things up to like 70% done, and then just have a field of, so I like won't put anything out forever, but I've got this, I'm working constantly and have this field of like, this one's 70% done, this one's 78% done, this one's like 95, it just needs that last week. So I've got a bunch of those, and then a bunch of also new things to move on. But most importantly, yeah, Somatic Resonance course. I run cohorts of that sometimes, but mostly it's just like a pick up the course, work through it, and then come and like talk and chat, and we'll figure out what's going on about it. And that was nice. I'm going to add a volume 2 to that, I think, fairly soon. Going to get working on that. But that one's very nascent. Mostly I'm working, there's a mini book on spontaneous and systematic mode that I want to put out, because that's just a really, really core idea that nowadays I'm kind of incapable of talking about anything in the inner work area without looping in spontaneous and systematic mode a little bit. It's like I should put something out there that explains that specifically. And then, yeah, I've got 3 or 4 Substack articles that are going along. I've got a compilation book thing that's just kind of a confusing work in progress that I'm putting out there. And most importantly, the dream work course. I've been trying to put together some kind of imaginal offering for ever. People ask me fairly often, like, can you show me what's the imaginal stuff? Where can I learn about that? And there's not a lot of good sources. Like, go to Rosa or me or one of the like 5 or 6 people me and Rosa know who are good at this. But yeah, I finally think I have found like a workable way to give like an imaginal intro through dream work. And I'm hoping that should be done in the next couple weeks here. Fingers crossed. But yeah, those are the 2 that are closest to the finish line, are the dream work course and the little booklet on spontaneous and systematic mode. And then a bunch of side articles and rantings and the usual course and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
My desk is a tragedy right now.
Just gotta have the Einstein desk, man. I resonate with that. Super messy. That's a creative's desk. That's just how it is, you know.
That's just how it be.
yeah. So yeah, man, this has been a fascinating conversation. Really explored a lot from somatic meditation, imaginal work, mythopoetic cognition, parts work, dream work. Talked about some of the thinkers like Carl Jung, James Hillman, Burbea. Is there anything you wish I would have asked, or is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one minor bit of like wider context that's been occurring to me lately is like, I don't know, we live in a world where we kind of have to repress most of our experience from a very young age to just get by. And there's certain areas of our experience that like we get a chance to get back and air out and build out again. And what I focus on a lot with the somatic stuff, with the imaginal stuff, with their overlap, is in large part like, because I see those areas of experience as kind of the most like important underserved areas of experience that are consistently pushed down to the degree where like it's denied that they exist a lot of the time in a lot of circles. And like emotions have been pushed down for a long time too, but those have definitely been like back on the upswing. People are kind of getting more back in touch with what they're feeling, who they are. But yeah, stuff about like the wisdom of the body, and especially imagination, the imaginal, the importance of the mythopoetic aspects of our mind and being. They're just left out everywhere, all the time. And yeah, I'm just coming to realize more and more lately that that's kind of what I'm doing here, is just giving a boost to like the very bottom things that I feel are very important, to just pump a little more into the water, give them just a little bit more sunshine and air. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, River. Really appreciate the work you're doing with the Imaginal practice, with this somatic resonance, and the devotional productivity, and kind of all these threads that you're putting together. I'll definitely tuned in and following what you're doing, and just appreciate you for coming on and sharing yourself and your work with us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man. See you later.
Yes. Thank you, River. Take care.